My name is Margaret. I am 70 years old, and for most of my life I believed that retirement was a finish line, a quiet, gentle, and frankly rather boring finish line. It was the end of the race, the part where you stop running, catch your breath, and graciously move to the sidelines to watch the next generation run their own race. I believed my job was to stop, to rest, to fade politely into the background of other people's lives. I was wrong. I was profoundly, fundamentally, and dangerously wrong. At 70 years old, after 5 years of what I thought was a successful retirement, I had a realization that shattered everything I thought I knew about this final chapter of life. It was a realization that came not like a gentle dawn, but like a lightning strike, illuminating the truth of my own existence with a terrifying and brilliant clarity. And the truth was this: retirement isn't about stopping. It's about starting. It's about finally, for the first time in your life, having the freedom to ask yourself the most important question you will ever face. What do I want to do with the time that is mine? Not the time that belongs to your job, or your children, or your spouse, or your community, but the time that is truly, unequivocally yours. And once you have the courage to answer that question, you have a responsibility to start. To start messy, to start scared, to start imperfectly, but to start. Because the alternative, I have learned, is not rest. It is a slow, quiet, and soul-crushing death. I'm telling you this today, not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who has just begun to ask the right questions. I'm telling you this as a woman who spent 5 years trying to be a good, quiet, retired person, only to find herself more lost, more invisible, and more unhappy than she had ever been in her life. And I'm telling you this as a woman who, at 70 years old, is just now learning how to live. This is the story of how I stopped stopping and how I started starting. And my deepest hope is that it will give you the courage to do the same. For 40 years, I was a high school English teacher, Mrs. Albright. That was me. My life was a beautiful, chaotic, and deeply rewarding cycle of Shakespeare, grammar, and the endless, hopeful faces of teenagers. I loved my job. I loved the rhythm of the school year, the smell of old books, the challenge of trying to convince a 17-year-old boy that The Great Gatsby was more than just a story about a rich guy with a nice car. I believed with every fiber of my being in the power of stories. I just never thought I had one of my own worth telling. My life outside of the classroom was one of quiet service. I was a wife to my dear Tom, a man I've loved for 48 years. I was a mother to our 2 wonderful children, Sarah and Michael, who are now grown with children of their own. I was the caregiver, the planner, the worrier, the one who made sure everyone else's life was running smoothly. My own dreams, my own desires, they were like a whisper in the background of a loud and busy life. There was a novel I always wanted to write, a story that had been living in the back of my mind for decades. But it was a someday dream, a dream for a time that never seemed to arrive. When I retired at 65, I felt a profound sense of relief. The race was over. I had done my part. I had raised my family. I had served my community. I had graded my last essay. Now, I thought, was the time to rest. Now was the time to stop. My vision for retirement was a scrapbook of pleasant, gentle, and utterly unambitious activities. I would be a full-time grandmother. I would volunteer at the local hospital. I would join a book club. I would tend to my garden. I would, in short, become a caricature of a retired woman, a sweet, helpful, and ultimately invisible old lady. And for a few years it worked, or so I told myself. I loved being a grandmother. I adored my 4 grandchildren, and I threw myself into their lives with the same energy I had once given to my students. I picked them up from school. I took them to the park. I baked cookies. I was the quintessential doting grandma. I volunteered at the hospital, pushing the book cart from room to room, offering a smile and a magazine to people who were lonely and scared. I joined a book club where we would discuss the latest bestseller over tea and scones. My days were full. My calendar was busy. I was, by all external measures, a successful retiree. But a strange thing began to happen. A quiet, creeping sense of nothingness. It started as a whisper, a faint feeling of dissatisfaction that I would quickly push away. I was busy, yes, but I was not fulfilled. I was helpful, but I was not essential. I was present in everyone's life, but I was absent in my own. The days began to blend into one another, a long, monotonous string of pleasant but ultimately meaningless tasks. I was a supporting character in a dozen different stories, but the protagonist of my own story had gone missing. I remember my 68th birthday party. My children threw me a lovely party in my backyard. All my friends and family were there. The sun was shining. The grandchildren were running around on the lawn. It was a perfect picture. But as I stood there, holding a tray of appetizers, I had a strange out-of-body experience. I watched myself moving through the crowd, smiling, laughing, making sure everyone had a drink. And I realized that no one was really seeing me. They were seeing Mom. They were seeing Grandma. They were seeing Margaret, who is so sweet and helpful. But they were not seeing Margaret, the person. The woman with her own thoughts, her own fears, her own long-buried dreams. I felt like a ghost at my own party. A friendly, smiling, and utterly transparent ghost. I would stand on the edge of a conversation, and people would talk around me, through me, but never to me. They would talk about their jobs, their promotions, their plans for the future, and I would just nod and smile because I had nothing to add. My productive life was over. My story was finished. I was in the epilogue, and no one is ever very interested in the epilogue. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in the quiet of my living room, and I felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. It was a feeling I had never allowed myself to feel before. The feeling that my life, my real life, was over, and that I had another 10, 20, maybe even 30 years of this nothingness to look forward to. It was a prison of my own making, a prison of pleasantness, of helpfulness, of stopping, and I had no idea how to escape. But the universe, I have found, has a way of sending you a key when you need it most. My key came in the form of my 12-year-old granddaughter, Emma. She is a bright, curious, and wonderfully direct child. She came over to my house one afternoon, a few months after my disastrous birthday party. She was working on a school project, a presentation about her family. She was interviewing everyone, asking them about their lives, their jobs, their memories. She had a little notebook and a pen, and she was taking her role as a journalist very seriously. She interviewed her grandpa Tom about his time as an engineer. She interviewed her mom about being a lawyer. She interviewed her uncle about being a doctor. And then she turned to me. She sat cross-legged on the floor in front of my armchair, her pen poised over her notebook, and she looked at me with her big, earnest eyes. "Okay, Grandma," she said, her voice full of purpose. "It's your turn." I smiled. "All right, sweetie, what do you want to know?" She looked down at her list of questions. It says here, "What was your biggest dream when you were a kid, and did you achieve it?" The question hit me like a physical blow. It was so simple, so innocent, and so utterly devastating. My biggest dream, the novel, the story that had been living inside me for 50 years, the story I had never told, the story I had buried under a mountain of responsibilities, of excuses, of somedays. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. I just sat there, frozen. My mind was a complete and total blank. It was as if the part of my brain that held my own dreams had atrophied from disuse. It was a muscle I hadn't exercised in half a century, and now it was simply gone. Emma looked up at me, her brow furrowed with concern. "Grandma, are you okay?" I tried to smile, but I could feel my lips trembling. I don't know, sweetie," I stammered. I can't remember." She tilted her head, confused. "You must have had a dream," she said, her voice full of the simple logic of a child. "Everyone has a dream." And that was it. That was the sentence that broke me. Everyone has a dream. And I, at 68 years old, had forgotten mine. Or worse, I had given up on it so completely that it no longer even existed. I mumbled something about being tired, and I excused myself. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and I wept. I wept for the girl I used to be, the girl who believed in stories, the girl who believed she had one of her own to tell. I wept for the woman I had become, a woman so consumed by the lives of others that she had no life of her own. I wept for the years I had lost, the years I had spent stopping when I should have been starting. That moment was my rock bottom, but it was also my foundation, because as I stood there, looking at my own tear-streaked face in the mirror, a new feeling began to emerge from the depths of my despair. It was a tiny, flickering ember in the cold, dark emptiness. It was anger. I was angry at myself for giving up. I was angry at the world for telling me that a woman's job was to be a caregiver, a supporter, a ghost. And I was angry at the idea that my life was over, that my story was finished. No, I thought, no, it is not finished. I will not let it be finished. That night I made a decision, a quiet, secret, and utterly terrifying decision. I was going to write my novel. I was going to start. I didn't know how. I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if it was too late. But I knew, with a certainty that came from the very core of my being, that I had to try. because the thought of dying with my story still inside me was 1,000 times more terrifying than the thought of trying and failing. I didn't tell anyone at first. It was my secret, my precious, fragile, and deeply personal secret. I bought a new laptop. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., the same time I used to get up when I was teaching. The house was dark and quiet. Tom was still asleep. The world was still asleep. And in that quiet, pre-dawn darkness, I would sit at my kitchen table, open my laptop, and I would face the terrifying, exhilarating, and completely blank white page. For the first few weeks, it was torture. Absolute torture. The words wouldn't come. My mind was a desert. The inner critic, that vicious, relentless voice that lives inside all of us, was screaming at me. "Who do you think you are?" it would say. "A 70-year-old woman trying to write a novel. It's pathetic. You have nothing to say. No one will ever read this. You're wasting your time. You should be sleeping. You should be resting. You should be stopping." There were days when I would sit there for 2 hours and write a single, terrible sentence. There were days when I would write a whole page only to delete it in a fit of self-loathing. I almost gave up a dozen times. I would close the laptop, my heart heavy with failure, and I would think, "The voice is right. This is a mistake. I'm too old. It's too late." But then I would think of Emma's question. Everyone has a dream. And I would think of the emptiness I had felt. And I knew that the pain of trying and failing was nothing compared to the pain of not trying at all. The pain of stopping. So the next morning, I would get up at 5 a.m. and I would sit at my kitchen table and I would face the blank page again. Slowly, painfully, and miraculously, something began to shift. I started to find the voice of my character. A woman like me who had spent her life in the shadows and was finally ready to step into the light. I started to find the rhythm of my story. I stopped trying to write a perfect novel, and I just started to tell a true story. My story, her story, our story. And a funny thing happened. The more I wrote, the more I wanted to write. The act of starting, of creating, of building something out of nothing, it began to generate its own energy. I was no longer pushing a boulder up a hill. I was riding a wave. I would wake up at 4:30 a.m., not because my alarm went off, but because I was excited to get back to my story. I would think about my characters all day. They became my friends, my companions. They were more real to me than the people in my book club. After a few months, I finally got the courage to tell Tom what I was doing. I was terrified he would laugh, or that he would be worried, or that he would tell me I was being foolish. I sat him down at the kitchen table one morning, my hands trembling, and I said, "Tom, I have something to tell you. I'm writing a novel." He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and then he smiled. A slow, gentle, and incredibly loving smile. "I know," he said. I was stunned. "You know? How could you know?" "Margaret," he said, reaching across the table and taking my hand, "I've been married to you for 48 years. I know when something has changed. You've been different these last few months. You're alive in a way I haven't seen since we were in our 20s. You have a fire in your eyes again. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was something good. So, you're writing a novel. That's wonderful. Tell me about it. And as I started to tell him about my story, about my characters, about my hopes and my fears, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I didn't even know I had been carrying. The secret was out, and I was not alone. I had a partner who saw me, who believed in me, and who was proud of me. Not for stopping, but for starting. My children were a different story. When I told them, their reaction was a mixture of confusion and concern. "A novel, Mom," my daughter Sarah said, her voice laced with a skepticism she was trying to hide. "That's ambitious. Are you sure you want to take on something so big? You're supposed to be enjoying your retirement. You're supposed to be relaxing." "I am enjoying it," I told her, "more than I have in years." "But what if you don't finish it?" my son Michael asked, always the practical one. "What if you can't get it published? I just don't want you to be disappointed." And that's when I had my second great realization. The realization that had been bubbling under the surface for months, and that now, finally, broke through into the light. I looked at my two wonderful, loving, and completely misguided children, and I said, "Oh, my darlings, you don't understand. It's not about finishing. It's not about getting published. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. It's about the starting. It's about the doing. It's about the living. For the first time in my life, I am doing something that is just for me. Not because I have to, not because someone expects me to, but because I want to, because it makes me feel alive. And that is the point. That is the success. The rest is just details." And in that moment, I knew it was true. The goal was not to write a novel. The goal was to become a writer. The goal was not to achieve a dream. The goal was to live a dream. And I was doing it. Every single morning when I sat down at my kitchen table, I was living my dream. And it was the most exhilarating, the most terrifying, and the most wonderful feeling in the world. That conversation was 6 months ago. I am now 70 years old. I have written over 60,000 words of my novel. I don't know if it's any good. I don't know if it will ever be published. And I have discovered, to my profound surprise, that I don't care. What I care about is the woman I have become in the process. I am a woman who has a purpose. I am a woman who has a passion. I am a woman who has a story to tell. My life has been transformed. I still love my grandchildren, but I am no longer just their babysitter. I am a writer. I still volunteer at the hospital, but I am no longer just the book cart lady. I am a writer. I am still a wife, a mother, a friend, but I am also, finally, myself. And my relationships have become richer and more authentic because of it. My children no longer see me as a fragile old woman who needs to be protected. They see me as a person, a vibrant, interesting person who is pursuing a passion. They ask me about my book. They are proud of me, not for what I have accomplished, but for who I am becoming. And Tom and I have fallen in love all over again. We have something new to talk about, something new to share. He is my biggest cheerleader, my first reader, my rock. He sees the fire in my eyes, and it has rekindled a fire in his own. We are not two people who are stopping together. We are two people who are starting again together. So this is my message to you. If you are retired or if you are approaching retirement, I beg you, do not make the mistake I made. Do not believe the lie that your life is over. Do not believe that your only job is to rest, to fade, to stop. Your life is not over. It is just beginning. You have been given a gift, the gift of time, the gift of freedom, the gift of a blank page. Do not let that gift go to waste. Find the dream you buried 50 years ago, the painting you never painted, the instrument you never learned to play, the language you never learned to speak, the business you never started, the story you never told. Find it, and then start. Start small. Start scared. Start today. Because retirement is not a destination. It is a starting line. It is the beginning of your most important chapter, the chapter that you get to write for yourself. And I promise you, it is the best story of all. Let me take you deeper into those 5 years of stopping, because it wasn't a sudden halt. It was a slow, gentle, and almost imperceptible fading. Like a photograph left in the sun, the colors of my own life were slowly bleaching out, and I was too busy admiring the scenery to notice I was disappearing. In the first year, the freedom was intoxicating. No more 5:30 a.m. alarms. No more stacks of essays to grade. No more parent-teacher conferences. I felt like I had been released from a long but loving prison sentence. I filled my days with a flurry of activity. I took a cooking class. I joined a yoga studio. I reorganized every closet in the house. I was a whirlwind of retired energy. Tom, who was still working at the time, would come home to a new gourmet meal every night. I could get used to this, he'd say, and I would beam with pride. I was being a good, productive, retired person. But the novelty, like all novelties, began to wear off. The cooking class ended. I discovered that I am not and never will be a flexible person. So the yoga studio was a short-lived experiment. And there are only so many closets a person can reorganize. The whirlwind of activity slowed to a gentle breeze, and then to a dead calm. And in that calm, the silence began to creep in. By the 3rd year, I had settled into a routine of other people's routines. My days were dictated by the school bell, not for me, but for my grandchildren. I would pick them up from school, my car filled with the happy, chaotic noise of children. We'd go to the park or the library or for ice cream. I was their chauffeur, their snack provider, their playmate, and I loved it. Truly, I did. But when I would drop them back at their homes and drive back to my own quiet house, the silence would be waiting for me, and it would be louder than ever. I remember one afternoon I was at my book club. We were a group of 10 women, all retired, all intelligent and well-read. We were discussing a novel, a brilliant, complex story about a woman who leaves her family to become an artist. The conversation was lively, passionate, and I sat there, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and I realized I had nothing to say. My opinions felt secondhand. I could analyze the character's motivations. I could discuss the author's use of symbolism. I could do all the things I had taught my students to do for 40 years. But I had no personal connection to the story. The character had made a choice, a bold, terrifying, and life-altering choice. And I had not made a choice for myself in years. I was a critic, not a creator, a commentator, not a participant. And the gap between the two felt like a chasm. My volunteer work at the hospital was the same. I was a dispenser of pleasantries, a mobile distraction unit. I would move from room to room offering a smile, a kind word, a magazine. I was a brief, welcome interruption in a day of pain and boredom. But I was not a part of their story. I was a footnote. And when I would leave the hospital, the weight of all those real, raw, and difficult stories would follow me home. And my own life, in comparison, felt so small, so trivial, so utterly devoid of drama or conflict or meaning. This was the landscape of my life when I turned 68. A landscape of gentle hills and pleasant valleys, but no mountains, no soaring peaks, no terrifying cliffs, just a long, flat, and unending road of niceness. And the birthday party was the moment I finally saw that landscape for what it was. Not a peaceful pasture, but a barren wasteland. The conversation with Emma, my granddaughter, was the earthquake that cracked that wasteland open. It wasn't just the question. It was the look on her face when I couldn't answer it. It was a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. In her 12-year-old world, a person without a dream was an impossibility. It was like a person without a name or a person without a face. It simply did not compute. And in her confusion, I saw the full extent of my own emptiness. I had become a person who did not compute. When I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, I didn't just see a sad old woman. I saw a stranger, a woman with my face, my hair, my eyes, but not my soul. My soul, the part of me that dreamed, that yearned, that created, it was gone. And in that moment, I felt a grief so profound, it was like a death. It was the death of myself. And the anger that followed was not a hot, fiery anger. It was a cold, hard, and diamond-sharp anger. The anger of a person who has been robbed and who has just realized that she was the one who left the door unlocked. That anger became my fuel. It was the energy that got me out of bed at 5 a.m. It was the force that pushed my fingers onto the keyboard when my mind was a blank. It was the voice that whispered, "You are not dead yet," when the inner critic was screaming, "You are a fool." The first few months of writing were a battle, a war fought in the pre-dawn darkness of my kitchen. Me versus the blank page. Me versus the inner critic. Me versus a lifetime of believing I had nothing to say. I wrote 100 pages of absolute garbage. I wrote characters that were flat, plots that were boring, and sentences that were clunky and lifeless. I was a terrible writer, but I was a writer because I was writing. That was the distinction that saved me. A writer is not someone who writes well. A writer is someone who writes, and I was writing every single day. I remember one morning, about 3 months in, I was ready to give up. I had been working on a chapter for a week, and it was going nowhere. It was like trying to build a house out of smoke. I reread what I had written, and it was so bad, so amateurish, so utterly pathetic that I felt a hot flush of shame. This is it, I thought. I'm done. I can't do this. It was a stupid idea. I put my cursor on the delete button. My finger hovered over it, and I thought about the relief I would feel, the relief of stopping, the relief of giving up, the relief of going back to my quiet, empty, and painless life. But then I thought about Emma. I thought about the look on her face, and I thought about the alternative. The alternative was the nothingness, the epilogue, the ghost at the party. And as painful as writing was, the pain of not writing was infinitely worse. So I took my finger off the delete button, and I wrote one more sentence, and then another, and then another. It wasn't good, but it was something. And something, I was beginning to learn, was a hell of a lot better than nothing. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a lightning strike. It was a sunrise, a slow, gradual, and almost imperceptible dawning of a new understanding. It was the realization that the book was not the point. The writing was the point. The process was the point. The act of creation was the point. The book was just the excuse to get up in the morning, the excuse to have a purpose, the excuse to be alive. And once I understood that, everything changed. The pressure was off. The inner critic lost its power. I was no longer trying to write a masterpiece. I was just trying to tell my story. And in doing so, I was creating myself. I was building a new identity, sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter. I was no longer Margaret, the retired teacher. I was no longer Margaret, the grandmother. I was Margaret, the writer. And that identity was mine. I had earned it. I had built it. And no one could ever take it away from me. My conversation with my children was a turning point. I saw in their loving, worried faces the reflection of the world's expectations. The expectation that a woman of my age should be winding down, not gearing up. That my role was to be a soft place for others to land, not a rocket ship launching into a new orbit. And I realized that my little act of starting, my quiet personal rebellion, was not just for me. It was for them too. It was a demonstration that life does not have to follow a predictable arc, that you can change your story at any time, that you can be a mother, a grandmother, and a writer, that you can be a caregiver and a creator, that you can be 70 years old and just getting started. Now, when they call me, they don't just ask about the grandchildren, they ask about the book. "How's the writing going, Mom?" Sarah will ask, and there is a new note of respect in her voice. "Have you figured out what happens to your main character?" Michael will ask, and there is a genuine curiosity in his eyes. They are seeing me, not the role I play in their lives, but the person I am. And that is a gift more precious than any novel. And Tom, my dear patient Tom, he has become my partner in this new adventure. He reads my chapters. He tells me when they are good, and he gently tells me when they are not. He makes me coffee in the morning. He guards my writing time like a dragon guards its treasure. He is the first person to see the fire in my eyes, and he has become the keeper of that flame. Our love, which had become a comfortable, quiet companionship, has now become a vibrant, exciting partnership. We are not just growing old together, we are starting new together. So do not let anyone tell you that your story is over. Do not let the world convince you that your only job is to stop. You are not a period at the end of a sentence. You are a comma, a semicolon, a new paragraph. You are a blank page waiting for a new story to be written, and you are the only one who can write it. So pick up the pen and start. The world is waiting to read what you have to say.